live on my Twitter feed
Yeah,
too.
we're all set.
Anybody that's watching, they'll just be watching.
We're all set to roll.
Just like you're on TV.
Oh.
And like on live TV here, and then but we're gonna also have it recorded for prosperity.
Here we go. We're all set.
Okay. Well, to talk about the match race, it was.
Shut that door for me, would you? Thank you. Here you go.
The match race came about as a result of 3 separate horses winning the Triple Crown races. And the television network, I forget which network it was, but they wanted to put together a race of the 3 winners of the Triple Crown races. And they would put up the money, $400,000, which was the biggest purse run in America that year. So originally it was supposed to be those 3 horses. Well, the trainer of Avatar, the owner of Avatar had horses both in New York and in California. And if Avatar stayed in New York, the California trainer was going to lose him. He wasn't going to get to keep him in training. So he immediately put Avatar on a plane and sent him back to California. That way he would keep him.
That's me. Keep going, keep going, keep going. I got it.
So that left the Preakness winner and Foolish Pleasure. And then they came up with the idea of running Ruffian against the 2 colts. So they kicked it back and forth for a few days, and really nothing was happening. It seemed like a dead issue. So I was home after a kind of a long, tough spring, taking a nap, and Jack Dreyfus, who was the chairman of the NYRA, called up, and I was home in my pajamas taking a nap. He said, "I want you to come over. We've got the TV people here. We're going to try to put this thing together." And I said, "Look, I'm taking a nap." He said, "I don't care. Come in your pajamas. You know, come any way you want." So I got dressed and went over, and we were in Mr. Dreyfus' office, and he was at his desk, and we had like a semicircle of TV people, press people, Denny Phipps, who was representing the Jannies, and I was there representing Foolish Pleasure. So Mr. Dreyfus came up with the idea that we were going to have a 3-horse race, and I said, you know, I couldn't do that. And he said, "Well, why can't you do that?" And I said, "Well, my horse has speed, or he can come from behind. But in a 3-horse race, Ruffian was an extreme speed horse, and the Preakness winner had no speed. He was a plotter who came from behind. So in my position, if I went with Ruffian to try and down her, the other guy was going to gallop by us and win. And if I took back to run with him, at the finish, Ruffian was going to be long gone. So there was no way in a 3-horse race that I could win. So I said, good luck, but I'm not running. So that kind of upset everybody. And Mr. Dreyfus says, "Well, let me think about this." So he kind of turned his back to us all and faced the wall and got up on his desk in a lotus position and went into some kind of a trance for a few minutes. And we were all kind of looking at each other like, you know, what do we do now? Anyway, he finally came out of his trance and got back in his chair, and he said, "This is what we'll do. We'll pay Mrs. Lehman not to run the Preakness winner, and we'll run just the 2 horses, Foolish Pleasure and Ruffian." And that's how the race was made.
Leroy, so let me join you here for a minute. First of all, who was the Preakness winner that year?
I can't remember his name.
Me neither. Jacob, look it up on your thing. Okay, after that point, how much, like we just stood out there and watched American Pharoah train, and you got the Kentucky Derby winner, and Ruffian had a following like American Pharoah. Was there a lot of hysteria leading up to the race?
Oh yeah, it was a big deal. We were in the burning of the bra era, and Billie Jean King and you know, the match between Gene King and Bobby Riggs. So we had a lot of male-female confrontation going on, and the match race was, kind of the epitome of all that.
And Cinto Vasquez had ridden both horses their whole life, correct?
Right.
And he just won the Derby on your horse. Did you run in the Preakness in Belmont?
Finished second in both races.
Really? And
Yeah.
a different horse beat you both times?
Yeah.
So, did you wonder who Jacinto was going to ride?
I never doubted that he would ride Ruffian. He and Frank Whiteley had a very strong relationship. Maybe he never fought with Frank like he did with me. But anyway, they had a very strong relationship. And he chose to ride Ruffian, which I really wasn't surprised. I thought he would.
And so you chose to ride your horse,
Braulio Bieza.
which at the time was he still one of the leading riders, if not the leading rider in the country?
Oh yeah, he was a great rider, an extremely good rider. And Braulio was the kind of rider that he could ride young horses, old horses, short, long, dirt, grass, didn't make any difference. He was just an outstanding rider.
But there was a little conflict with him and Frank Whiteley.
They had had a battle that I never knew about over Damascus. And I was watching the evening news on TV 2 or 3 days after I chose Bieza to ride. And I saw Bieza on the evening news at 11 o'clock, and he was saying, no way would I ever ride a horse for Frank Whiteley, which I didn't know anything about.
But that kind of added to the whole hysteria.
It was part of the whole equation.
Master Derby one.
Master Derby. That's a Master Derby. So
Derby.
when they reduced the field to from three to two, you were telling me the part. Well, they gave Master Derby's owners money
They gave him $50,000 not to run
and reduced the purse to $350,000.
to $350,000, which was still the biggest race run in America.
It's probably of all time.
Probably up to that point, yeah.
And the two of them. Now, what were Frank Whiteley's demands?
What was his what?
What were his demands going into the race?
Well, really no demands. He wasn't there. He represented them, and there were no
Well,
real
what about
demands.
coming out of the chute?
Well, Kenny No, who was the racing secretary, he came up to me. Nobody ever decided where they were going to break. It was a chute that was in the center of the training track, or you could break on the turn. So it was never determined. So about 3 days before the race, Kenny No came over to the barn and he said, where do you want to go from? Where do you want to start? I said, I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to me. And I really thought that Frank would choose the turn because with Ruffian's extreme speed, I figured he would think that if he could break in front and drop into the rail, that he would have an advantage around that little half a turn. But instead, he chose the straightaway and in the chute up in the training track, which I was surprised, but that's what he picked, so that's the way it was.
Where were they both laying? I mean, we've all seen the movies. Personally, I can never watch the live. I can't stand to watch her get hurt, but were they head and head?
They were head and head. I think at the time of the accident, Ruffian was maybe a head in front, maybe a short neck and not a full neck. But if you look at it, Jacinto is riding hard, and Braulio is kind of folded up, sitting with him.
So you thought you would have her?
Well, they were both outstanding horses, and the thing about Foolish Pleasure was that he was maybe not the greatest talent, but one of the most competitive, tough horses that I've ever been around. And there was no give up in him. If you were going to beat him, you had to run him into the ground.
What was it like that night? I mean, it went from the biggest height. First of all, how many people were there?
I think they had about 45,000, 50,000.
And it was on network TV.
Yeah.
So it goes from the biggest height to, it's a tragedy. What was the feeling like that night?
Well, it was really a mess, to be very honest. They took Ruffian in the horse ambulance from the racetrack back to Frank Whiteley's barn and tried to treat her there. And she was a very, very rough patient. She'd been that way all of her life. and they tried to treat her there, and they determined that they would try to do surgery on the ankle that she broke. And Dr. Reed had a surgery hospital, excuse me, just on the other side of the racetrack on Plainfield Avenue. So they gave her a lot of painkillers, got her on a van, took her over to Dr. Reed's hospital, and as soon as they could, they got her anesthetized and into surgery.
Who did the surgery?
Dr. Reed.
Was Harthill there to assist?
Harthill was there. He was there that day, and after we got finished putting our horse away at the barn, at our barn, I stopped by the hospital where we knew she had been taken, and went in, and Dr. Reed was working on her, and Harthill was right at his side.
How about the days to follow? Was there any bashing of horse racing in the press, or
I don't
more
think
just
so.
concern about what had happened?
I don't think so. I think it was a great tragedy, and you know, America is a country of animal lovers, so anything that happens to an animal obviously brings out, you know, huge, you know, response. And you know, there was certainly some response, but it only lasted maybe a week or so.
But nobody's ever forgotten.
No,
Anybody
no.
who's a racing fan, that's a big part of American racing history, was that one day.
Well, it was a big deal, and because of the times, I think the male-female adversarial position was you know, a big part of it, and
It was going to be a great thing for the nation.
yeah, it drew everybody's attention, and they had all kinds of pens and banners, and I've still got some of them at home.
Well, racing survived it. America survived it. But it was a tragic day. But you've been involved in many great things in racing. Give us, before we go, your one biggest highlight.
Well, oddly enough, probably the biggest highlight, my first great highlight, was as a kid growing up, my father was a horse trainer, and I always loved the Hopeful, the 2-year-old stake here at Saratoga. And I remember sitting at the barn. I was about 12 years old. My father ran a horse. They left the barn, and it was dusty. And by the time the horses came on the track, there was about 2 inches of water on it. And my father's horse finished second. And it just kind of stuck in my mind. I always wanted to win the Hopeful. And then there were a number of races. You know, you never dream of winning races like the Derby because it always seems too big and too far away. But, you know, I grew up on the racetrack, and I always wanted to win the Flamingo. That was a big deal at Hialeah.
That used to be a huge race.
Huge race. And so anyway, with Foolish Pleasure, he kind of won all the races that I dreamed about as a kid.
He did win the Hopeful.
He won the Hopeful.
Was that your first Hopeful?
The first Hopeful.
And then he went on to win the Flamingo.
He won the Champagne in between.
And the Kentucky Derby.
And the Flamingo and the Derby. So he was great to me.
You know, he doesn't get talked about it enough, I don't think, as with all the great past American horses. But he did a lot for you, but he did a lot for racing.
Yeah, he was a great little horse, tough. He kind of walked in front like Daffy Duck. He toed out in both front feet, but he had a great body and a great hind leg, and he was a very good horse.
I was just going to have you sit here and talk about the match race, because I thought that story you've told me many times should be recorded. But since I got you here, what made you run Genuine Risk against the boys when only 2 fillies had ever won the Kentucky Derby?
Well, up until her win, only one in 1950.
Oh, that's right, only one.
Yeah.
And that was not even in modern time.
We ran her in the Wood Memorial. She was undefeated, and we ran her in the Wood Memorial, and she finished third. Got beat about a length and a half. Ran good, just didn't win. And when she was coming back after the race, she was tired. You could, you know, when I was down on the track when Jacinto got off and took the saddle off, and she was tired. She was blowing and tired. And having been around her through her whole career, she gave it all she had every single time. And I really felt like she had tried hard and couldn't make it. And I felt like, I really didn't want to run her in the Derby.
You didn't.
And I said so. And I thought that she was going to need a pretty good recovery time just to get over that race without thinking about where to go the next time. So anyway, Bert and Diana Firestone loved the Derby, always wanted to win the Derby. So they said, oh, let's go, let's go. So anyway, I said, okay, let's make a deal. They lived down in Leesburg, Virginia at the time. So I said, let's walk her a couple of days, Sunday and Monday. And Tuesday, we'll take her back to the track, and you all come up and we'll see how she is. So anyway, they flew up, and Tuesday morning was, typical April morning in New York, chilly, cold, and Jacinto came over and got on her, and we decided that we'd gallop her once around at Belmont, and she tried to run off with him. She was really feeling good, and he had a hell of a time getting her around the racetrack. So with that in mind, it looked like she had fully recovered. So we made a deal that we would take her to Kentucky and run her only if everything went right, and only in the Derby, not in the Oaks. And if things didn't go right, we were just going to come back to New York and run in the Philly Triple Crown.
Freshen her up. Well, things went really right.
Well, it was one of those things that I think it was just a case of fate, because a number of horses in the race, one got sick, one got hurt, and the race really softened up as we got closer to the race. And everything went great for her, and it didn't go great for everybody else. So it was her turn.
And history was made by Leroy Jolley again. But then the Preakness, that was one of the most memorable Preaknesses in history.
Yeah.
What went on there? Tell us. I'll let you go here in just a minute. It's just hard. We have the greatest living American horse trainer sitting with us talking on our first Periscope weekend. It's a great treat for me just to sit here and talk to him, so I'm not going to let him go just yet. Last one, what about the Preakness that day, the rough ride?
Well, Genuine Risk was laying second down the backstretch, and she came from just off the pace. She was not a lead horse, but she came from just off the pace. And Codex was on the lead, and she moved to him, and as she moved to him, as they approached the head of the stretch, Cordero came out, and carried her out into the middle of the racetrack, and then dropped away from her. And, it was a pretty excessive thing to do, which Cordero was a great rider, a very daring guy, and he would take a shot. And in this case, he took a shot and he got away with it.
There was a long inquiry, right?
It was a pretty long inquiry, and then we had a review at the Racing Commission, and then they ended up in court. So it was a
big deal. That's sort of where the lore of Angel Cordero might have been born for the rest of the nation.
Right.
That everyone understood then that he could ride his horse and everybody else's.
But he was a great rider, and he took a shot. He carried her out. He had just the right position where he could do it. And, when you come to a horse at the head of the stretch and they angle you out, you got to go out. You can't run through
You don't
them.
have a choice.
You can't run through them. You got to go around them.
Leroy, thanks for sitting here and talking to us on our first Periscope show. We don't know where we're going with this, but we wanted to record some history of horse racing and let people see through my eyes and other people's eyes what goes on back here. We didn't expect to have Leroy Jolley on the first weekend.
Right.
He's right here in the barn with me, volunteered to do it. Hope everyone liked it.
We just had a couple people say, forget American Pharoah. We could listen to you guys all weekend. So.
Well, hopefully we'll be back, because Leroy has a whole lot more stories. I like to just sit here and listen. One thing I am is a big racing fan, and we've had dinner together several times. He's got stories, endless stories that we need to get recorded, and hopefully we'll have him back.
Well, thank you very much, Dale.
All right, bud. Leroy, that was